Welcome to the Produce on Purpose podcast, where we experience life being the real you. Today, I have a guest. His name is Bob Martin. He is enjoying his interesting life. He's been a criminal lawyer, trial lawyer, a meditation teacher. He's a professor, a mindfulness coordinator at the Elon University. He's studied under Hu Ching Ni and a 72-year master from the Shaolin Temple, and he's married to a Bible literalist. He started writing his book as a Rosetta Stone and a love offering for his wife and him to discuss the nature of the universe. It has become a healing vehicle for many that it presents the teachings of Jesus in a broader interfaith light. Bob, it is wonderful to have you on the Produce on Purpose podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great today, and thank you for having me. And before we even go on, can I just take one moment to thank you for what you do?
Yeah.
It's a lot of work to put on a podcast and to create a platform for people to share their experiences. So I want to thank you for that, for the work that you do.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it. Yeah, this is definitely a work that I enjoy. I love it. It's a lot of fun. So, Bob, can you just share a little bit that provides us an idea of your mindfulness journey, of how you are, where you are today, and the importance of your message for our audience so they can know a little bit about you?
Okay. So, my life is it's unique, of course, like all of our lives are unique. My story's unique, but really there's a lot of commonality with most everybody. A lot of things came into my life that kind of directed me in one direction. So my folks, on a spiritual level, my folks were not very interested in religion. They came from Eastern Europe, and their families had all been slaughtered by one group or another, and so they just didn't feel there could be a loving God that would allow that to happen. So it wasn't that we were against it, but it was just not a conversation we had. So I kind of grew up without that. And I had a lot of life experiences and eventually wound up being a lawyer. And in a kind of funny way, wound up getting connected in the cocaine cowboy days of Miami. If you've ever seen the movie Scarface.
Yes.
So it was just like that. Things were just like that in Miami then. And I worked for the DA. We hit the mob for a lot of money. And after I went out and hung my shingle, they came and hired me. And I started hanging out with those guys. And, well, let's just say that I was doing some stuff that I was hanging out, staying out late at night, going to a lot of those chrome and glass disco bars that they had, back in the 70s and the like. And things were kind of going south for me, so I was seeing a therapist. And I came to an important crossroads, and I came and I asked my therapist, what should I do? What should I do? And he reached behind him and pulled out a little bag, and there were some coins in the bag, and he started shaking his hands and dropping the coins and recording whether they were heads or tails and working with some numbers and writing some lines. And I'm thinking I'm paying this guy $65 an hour to throw coins, and is he going to give me a tarot reading or something? And finally, he wrote down a number, and he opened up this book to that number chapter and showed me the name of the chapter, and the name was Retreat. And I cursed him out because I thought it was kind of silly that he was going to make a decision about my life by throwing coins, and I stomped out. But that word hit a core in my subconscious, and I knew that it was what I needed to do. Pull back from a lot of my behaviors. And fortunately, I hadn't gone down the tubes to the point where it was widely noticed. And I pulled back. And I sheepishly went back to him once, and I asked him, what was that? And he told me it was the I Ching, which is a Taoist book, which means, Ching means a classical book. and I means changes. So the I Ching is the book of changes, and it describes how life goes from day to night and night to day and winter to
Mm-hmm.
summer and summer to winter. But what the I Ching opens up for us in understanding is that not only do the cycles of nature work cyclically, but also the moods and the times of our lives work cyclically, because you've never been in your whole life, you've never been in good times where they haven't turned into bad times, nor have you ever been in bad times when they haven't gotten better.
Mm.
And so just from the experience of your own life, you can see that life is also cyclical in terms of the energy that. And what the I Ching teaches you is it teaches you to become aware of the energy around you, the energy, and I mean energy as the dynamic in relationships.
Uh-huh.
And then it advises what is the best, most effective and efficient way to align with that energy so that you're being effective and efficient. You are producing
Yeah.
well.
Okay.
And I said, well, how, what? I'm full of questions. Turns out that the fellow you mentioned before, watching Ni, was not a 72-year-old, but a 72nd generation
Ah.
master from the Shaolin Temple, who was, and my therapist was his English language editor for the books that he writes.
Okay.
So he was a disciple, and Master Ni came to Miami every month, and I studied under Ni for 8 years.
Mm.
And best thing that I can say to keep things, concise, I started out as an arrogant son of a gun, and I wound up as a lawyer dedicated to public service.
Right.
And that was the difference that Ni brought into my life, and Taoism generally, just to have a system of virtue that taught me how to live life in a way that was effective,
Mm-hmm.
efficient, and also virtuous.
Yes.
And it it was beautiful.
Bob, thank you for sharing a little bit of that journey because, I'm of the Christian faith, and I read your bio, and we had a conversation about Taoism and what you learned from your knee and what he shared. What I love about what you have done is you've had some studying that you've been doing, that you start to cross between what Jesus did and additionally what you had learned from the Tao. Can you begin to provide some semblance of what you learned out of that experience of writing the book that you've written, and also kind of doing some of the studying that you did? You and mention it as like a Rosetta Stone of kind of being able to get
Hmm.
to finding out where that is. But I'm
Right,
very
right.
interested in finding out, what did you find out, and how is that now you're starting to you're teaching obviously some of these things. But what did you find out initially about that cross between Christianity and what Jesus did and in
Mm.
Taoism?
So I, I'd run into some problems with my mob clients and decided it was good to move out of Miami, and wound up in North Carolina. And there I met and married a woman who is a Southern Baptist Bible literalist, deeply Christian, virtuous saint. And although she thought, my belief system was just weird, and I couldn't quite wrap my head around some of the science, and she believes literally in the Noah's Ark and the Garden of Eden, and it was hard for me to, accept that as true history. So we didn't have the ability to really talk to each other about how we thought the universe worked. And I remember there was one time when she was going off to church, and I was home Sunday, I was going to watch the news programs. And she looked at me and had these sad puppy dog eyes. And I said, "What's wrong, honey?" And she goes, "Oh, I love you so much, but I just hate it that you're not going to go to heaven with me, because I had not been saved." And I said, "Well, I hate it that you're not going to be reincarnated with me."
Oh, no.
And she, to which I got a gentle but firm slap.
I can imagine.
So, so I started to think about, I wonder what, what the church is and what the sermons are and what they're teaching there. So she would come home and I would ask her, what was the message today?
Hmm.
And as I heard what the message was, once I could kind of put away because it was a Southern Baptist and they're very conservative church that kind of believes that, our way is the only way. And so I could put aside that exclusivity and says, what is the nature of really the message? And whenever she would tell it to me, I would say, well, that reminds me of something in a book called the Tao Te Ching, which is the classical book of the way of virtue, because Tao means the way,
Hmm.
and the title of my book is I Am the Way.
Right.
So you could translate that and say, I am the Tao. So I got a kick out of that little coincidence. And so I started listening more carefully and then looking in the Tao Te Ching to see, where that was repeated. And I always found something. It was always there.
Hmm.
And so I started out very easily. Like I took one little thing that she got from her sermon and I looked and found it in the Tao. Then thank you, Google. I asked Google, what does the Bible say about humility? And I got all of these, passages. And I started reading them. And I said, there's nothing different about this. So then the only challenge was to try to put it into kind of a tempo and rhyme scheme that the Tao is written in,
Hmm.
but using the Christian terminology and the Christian metaphors.
Right.
And I said, hey, hon, listen to this. What do you think of this? And it literally stunned her. It stunned her. She goes, that's beautiful. And I go, wow, that's great. And so, I said, this is great. I'm going to do another one. Then we'll do another one. Finally, I did all the 81 chapters of it.
Hmm.
And she read it and she said, Bob, a lot of preachers have told me what to do and what not to do, what to feel is right and what's a sin, and who's sinful and who's not. But they never explained Jesus to me as well as reading this book has,
Wow.
because the book really reflects the essence of Jesus's teachings.
Right.
Um, can I give you an example? The Tao Te Ching and the I Ching, they teach that when you're about to go into a difficult situation, it's important to take time to reflect and prepare.
Hmm.
What did Jesus do? He went into the desert.
Right.
And when the devil came and the devil tempted him, he had been prepared. He had prepared himself for that temptation, and he was able to respond to it almost immediately, responsive, not reactive, didn't get all angry, didn't get challenged, just gave the appropriate response and was effective and efficient.
Right.
And so that story then became this chapter of the Tao then became that story.
Right.
Uh, Lao Tzu says that in leadership, one should step up into leadership regretfully and carefully and thoughtfully, always being concerned that it is the leadership, not the leader, that's important.
Right.
And then when your job is done, to retreat and go about your way so that the work endures. Jesus came, he in some ways was a reluctant prophet,
Hmm.
was reflected in various passages, but when his work was done, he ascended and his work has endured.
Right.
So there are so many things like that, and I was able to find, whenever I looked, I was always able to find just the right thing.
The parallels. So there were
The parallels.
parallels in that and in the messaging that you saw that was also in some of the Tao teachings. So yeah, that was very interesting to me as I was going through, and I was like, oh, this is very interesting because a lot of times we try, and it depends. I say we, groups try to really make everything as if it's a conflict. But
Hmm.
it sounds like you have brought them together and been able to show where there are similarities. And I also believe that when we are focused on the things that are similar, it allows everybody that's involved to grow, and allows everyone that's involved to kind of have a better look at what life is really about. So now you have been able to kind of do that, and sounds like maybe with your wife, you've gotten some probably some better no more slapping happening.
No more
So
slapping.
so
And
that's good.
as a matter of fact, some of her relatives, when we were getting married, some of her relatives said to her, "Well, you got to be careful because you're going to yoke yourself to a heathen." and and she said to them, Bob's got more spirituality in him than most of the folks in my church.
Mm, yeah, and it's a
So she
connectedness.
recognized it.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
connectedness, and
Hmm.
like the connection is not only with whatever your source is, but also the connection with everyone else that we meet, because there is a life of love and energy. I think that we all have. How do we continue to live that on a daily basis? So you are now at as a professor. You're doing some teaching there. What kinds of
Hmm.
teachings are you doing there? How does that fit into our daily life? And what are some things that we can get from what you're doing at Elon?
So I retired from lawyering, and they hired me to teach a survey course of business law to the undergraduates.
Yep.
But having been classically trained as a meditation teacher, there is a spiritual center on campus, and I kind of gravitated over there. And then I found out that there was a form of teaching meditation called Koru, Koru,
Mm-hmm.
that was developed at Duke University, that is specifically designed to be able to offer meditation to people, so that the Western mind, as Westerners, we kind of like want to know, when does it start, when does it end, how many minutes a week do I have to spend on it, what's my commitment. This is the way we are.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was designed around that. And for 4 years now, well, no, it's almost been 8 years, I have been pushing, trying to create a culture of mindfulness on campus. So just last year, they awarded me the assistant professorship of wellness, and I'm now over in the School of Education, and I'll be teaching actual hands-on meditation courses
Oh, that's
for,
awesome. Yeah.
for credit. For credit.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
On campus. Wow.
I'm really excited about it, and my first class starts next month.
Awesome.
Um, So, what I can offer your listeners is, just a. Sometimes it's really helpful to know what meditation is not.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people think that meditation is about quieting the mind and finding inner peace, and that it's very passive, sit there and kind of get lost in, nothingness. But that's far from what it is.
Okay.
It's actually a very active practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the best way I could explain it is, well, you have often listened to somebody, probably not on a podcast, but you've probably been listening to somebody in a regular casual conversation. And then all of a sudden you get this startled feeling, and you realize that you had stopped listening to them.
Mm.
Has this happened to you?
Oh yeah, that has happened
Oh, yeah,
many times.
many times. So, so that startled sensation that you get when I'm not listening, I missed that.
Right.
That's what we call waking up in meditation. And we walk around all day in a fog of rumination and projection. And then when something comes that calls our attention, we kind of wake up. We're driving along and a car gets a little too close and it's like, ding. If you were looking at a brain scan at that moment, what you would see is in the default mode, all of the top parts of our brain would be activated.
Right.
Think, what did I do today, and what do I got to do tomorrow, and what did that guy say to me yesterday, and did I leave the stove on, and what am I going to have for dinner, blah. The moment your attention is intended, you have intentional attention, it shifts to a completely different part of the brain.
Right.
So what we do in meditation is we kind of set that up so that you have the opportunity to be in default and then notice that you are in default and wake up from it, and then return and wake up and return and wake up. And as you do that, what happens is you start to become more familiar with what it's like to both the physical, mental, and I would say even spiritual sensations of being awake.
Okay.
And that being awakeness is what we call being in the present moment.
Right.
You hear that a lot, be in the present moment, be in the present moment. But it's that sense of awareness that is like that moment when you notice you're thinking.
Right.
And so with time, what happens, like somebody asked me the other day, if I, we were talking about doing something for faculty and staff with the stress of the upcoming election, and doing some kind of maybe a mini retreat around how to maintain, yourself in difficult situations like the upcoming election. And they asked me, well, do you feel the stress? And my answer was, yes, I do feel the stress. And at the very same time, I am watching myself feel the stress.
As an observer.
And as an observer.
Uh-huh.
And so from the place of feeling the stress, I am engaged in life.
Yep.
And from the place of the observer, I am calm.
Right.
So I can be angry and calm at the same time. And that's what you learn in the practice eventually.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because I have heard of meditation in multiple ways, and sometimes it's talked about as where your awareness is or having focus, and sometimes, as you have described, others have said it's releasing and just being in nowhere. I do like the idea of having an understanding of kind of taking a step back and understanding that we are kind of the observer and in this world, and how we are moving and interacting in this world. Of course, I have 5 senses, so I have to interact in this world. I have to socially be engaged. How can I be engaged and aware in this moment, not be in the past or in the future? Kind of, how do I be in this moment consistently? And it sounds like you share some portions there of what meditation is, because I've heard meditation in many ways. Can you share a little bit about what your maybe a tip or something that anyone can utilize to just be more in the moment? And I believe that will help someone today if they can understand, how can I be in this moment? Because I also think sometimes we put names and titles or labels on something, and I think being aware and being in this moment, I think, is one of the greatest things that we can all do. How can we do that?
Well, the instructions of simple breath awareness meditation are nothing more than forming an intention to put your attention on your breath, and then your mind wanders, goes into default within a few seconds. And then because you created that intention, you have that wake-up sensation. And then you return, and your mind wanders, and you wake up, and you return to your breath. And so that is a practice. And you, you can't do much with your mind by saying, I want to do this. I want to focus. Very difficult. I
Right.
want to be in the present moment. Can't happen. It's a practice where you become more aware of what being in the present moment feels like through a practice, through a discipline that you may spend a couple of minutes doing every day. It's an easy thing to do. You could say, I'm going to make this bed and I'm going to form the intention to pay attention to making this bed.
Yes.
And so while you're making the bed, you're looking at your corners and should I make hospital corners or should I make this corner? And you're fully engaged, and then your mind wanders.
Yeah.
But then you notice that it wanders and you bring yourself back. So that process of having and being non-judgmental with yourself and not thinking and beating yourself up because your mind wandered, because that's the process. There's nothing wrong with that. That is what we need to do to become aware. And what happens in a very short period of time, within a couple of weeks, 10 minutes a day, within a couple of weeks, what happens is you reconnect with your observer, because so many folks have disconnected from the observer completely, and they are their thoughts. I see something, I have a judgment, that's my truth, that's who I am, that's what I am.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no thinking about it. Something happens, a thought comes up, that's the truth. That's
Right.
what I am. And without being able to separate yourself from your thoughts and realizing that you're not your thoughts. Even in language, what do we say? We say, I had a thought.
Right.
So who is the I that had the thought?
Right.
And that's who we're disconnected from. We're disconnected from the I that is the creator of our thoughts, and therefore all we're doing is working on automated conditioning. So by learning to separate back from our thoughts and becoming more familiar with that observer, all of a sudden we gain the power to judge and evaluate whether the thought is actually helpful or not.
Yeah. I've often seen explained, and I feel like I can also sometimes be able to do this myself, is that there are times when there are just so many thoughts going on, but being able to take a step back and see that those thoughts are there and that there is a choice whether or not I can put a lot of emphasis into that thought, or I can just watch the thoughts just continue to run through the mind. And at any moment in time, if I'm aware that that is actually happening, it changes the way that you experience that moment, because now you are no longer just sitting there thinking that you're being affected by everything that is around you. You're like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
I'm seeing what's happening here and what's occurring.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's like you it's a aha moment, because if you can be able to understand that every one of us has that capability, it's happening with all of us at all times. And sometimes it does take us having an intention to say, you know what, I want to connect to that piece of me that is seeing and understanding the thoughts and the feelings, because many people are wrapped up in the feelings and how they are, and it's driving them. And it's like, wait a minute, I feel that, but it's somewhat, you said conditioning. I think of programs, I'm a computer programmer, that we have programs that we're running on and it's just automatic. And it's like, I've been
That's
running
right.
on this for a long time, but I can change that if
Mm-hmm.
I would like to and if I'm aware of it. I'm happy that you were able to share that and be able
Yeah,
to explain it.
absolutely.
Yeah,
And you know
because
what? Your mind, it has a mind of its own, which is kind of crazy. And that mind of its own is like a little bratty little boy who
yeah,
just wants to come up and have his little say. And so if you're a parent, you know that by keeping telling, don't do that, you can't do that, is not effective. What's effective is saying, if you're going to act like that, I'm going to remove myself.
Yeah.
So when that bratty little boy wants to have this unhelpful thought, you can't say to yourself, well, I'm going to stop having that thought. But what you can do is you can say, oh, there, I just noticed I had that thought. And you let it happen. You remove control. And what happens is the bratty little mind says, well, this isn't fun anymore. And all of a sudden, the thought stops coming up.
Yep.
It just on its own, it stops coming up. So you can't make it stop, but you can allow it to be, and it will run out of steam.
Yes. It's interesting because I've had on the podcast before as a solo podcast, there was a title I had. It was I Fired My Ego. And the reason I fired my ego is because my ego, regardless of how much I tried to whip my ego in shape, and it just made things worse. But the time that I finally said, you know what, ego, I am going to just step back, and you can do that. You can tell me and get mad or upset about whatever's happening. That's that bratty little boy, and saying, you know what, you can do it. Go ahead and have your temper tantrum. Have it. And, the first few times he's going to have his temper tantrum. And then after a while, it's just going to be like when we were kids. Well, no need to do that anymore. This is not fun because no one's reacting to what I'm doing. And isn't that interesting?
Right. Yeah.
How we can be in a space in life where if we get to a place where we understand that observing and we could see who we are and what's going on and the thoughts that are happening, and understand that we don't have to react to those situations the way we've always reacted, but we can at some point be able to take a look and say, oh, well, it doesn't have to be that way. And now I actually have a choice whether or not I want to include that thought in what I do or not. And man, it's a different level of peace. I give people and understanding that peace is something that can be beyond the understanding of all others that are on that automatic programming, because they are like, where's that coming from? So,
Mark, I just want to tell you a little something. One of my teachers, I'll always remember this moment. He said, so, when you finally can watch those thoughts, and then you're in a situation and you behave in a way that's not helpful, and you notice that it wasn't helpful. So maybe you won't do it the next time, or the next time, or the next time. As he was walking towards the door and leaving, he kept repeating, or the next time, or the next time. But it's like that. You notice it, and if you can just not react to it and let it be, you'll notice it the next time it comes up, and the next time, and then it just is. It's like bored, like you say, it gets bored.
Right.
This isn't fun. So go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, that's awesome, and I believe that having some practices and disciplines to have intention in your life, to get to that space where those reactions aren't just on automatic based on the way you feel or the thoughts and how things are kind of working and doing. My question.
And you asked.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
Go
ahead. It was. I had a class once and was talking about dealing with grief, and one of the students said, so you take, like, if let's say your child dies, is that when you would take up meditation? And I go, well, let's think of it this way. Your friend asks you to help him move into a second-story apartment, and he's got lots of furniture and a refrigerator. So would you start going to the gym that morning? or would you start going to the gym a couple of months before? So when you have to move, you have the strength.
Right.
And you have the tools and you have the practice. And so many times people say, oh, yeah, meditation. They hear me talking about meditation. That's what I need. I need that. And I said, are you willing to practice 10 minutes a day? Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Would you be willing to get up 10 minutes earlier? Oh, no.
Isn't that interesting? It's like,
Hmm.
it is not so much just the practice itself; it's the consistency, right? We can
Right.
have practices, we can have disciplines, and like you were talking, like if I'm going to get ready to help a friend move, and I'm doing this preparation, I've often heard, if I prepare for something, then when it's time for the opportunity, I will be ready for it. I
Right.
believe it's the same way with our intentionality about our spiritual
Hmm.
life, about how we connect to this world, that we should be able to look at that. So I was going to ask a question based on
Sure.
your background now that you've been in law, you've been in social work, you're about to teach mindfulness. The human condition and where we are today, and how we are interacting with society. Why are there these challenges that we currently see that most people are having to deal with?
There's a terrific book called Corruptible, which talks about power, who wants it, who gets it, and how it is dealt with. And he puts forward the idea that as society got bigger, there were two major factors that changed things. One was the idea of being able to throw a rock, because that made the small man contentious with the big man.
Mm,
So the idea of weapons that remove us from physical hand-to-hand combat.
right.
And so these school shootings wouldn't happen if we didn't have these crazy weapons.
Hmm.
So so that all of a sudden created a power structure where people who could have more weapons could yield power over others. But the other thing that was even more important was that some societies developed hierarchical organizations. And when you have hierarchical organizations, you have more power as you climb. And there are certain ways that values that are respected, like loyalty and opposition, and these things become important. And the very nature of a hierarchical society is going to create power struggles.
Hmm.
And so that's part of it. But I think another big part of it is that we are disconnected from the natural world. I mean, we don't experience awe enough. I think we have a responsibility to experience awe. You
Yeah.
got to go read whatever poem makes you that you say that is awesome. Go out and sit in a forest, watch a sunset,
Yeah.
whatever it is. I think that awe is the positive side, positive counterbalance, or well, not counterbalance, but the mirror to PTSD.
Mm.
When you experience awe, it changes your brain.
Hmm.
It gives you, it lets you feel what it feels like to lose yourself in something.
Mm.
And then if you reflect on that awesome feeling, you can develop a facility for experiencing awe. Again, it's a practice. You have to intentionally put yourself in situations where you experience awe. But like my wife says, oh, you're too easy. You cry at charitable ads, and that's okay. I'm a sap. But I but I love being a sap.
Yes.
I go out every morning. You should have a morning routine, because when the morning comes, it is the breaking of a new day, and you're going to trade a day of your life for that day. You're going to trade a day of your life. And I don't have as many many days in front of me as I have behind me.
Yeah.
So my days are important to me, and I'm going to trade a day of my life for the day, and I'll be doggone if that day doesn't go by that I don't leave something good in it,
Right.
that I don't leave something in it that made that day worth a day of my life.
There's an
Um,
expectation there, expectation
hmm
to see and be a part of the awe. Yeah.
hmm So I take my dogs to the elementary school that's down the road, and when the sun comes up, and they run around, and I love my dogs, they love me. I'm surrounded by love. The day breaks, I see the morning, and every morning I remind myself that life is awesome. And it becomes easier and easier to experience that. I often mention this to folks, and they'll say, well, that's just not something that happens every day. Well, you can make it happen every day, and it changes who you are, because
Right.
it lets you feel what it feels like to be involved in something that's bigger than yourself, and that's your whole, not your whole, but it is your podcast
Yep.
with purpose,
Yeah.
purpose and meaning, and it gives you the sense that you are maybe a small peg, but you're still a small peg in a very, very, very big universe.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? We are very small when it comes to this huge universe that's out there, even just in our basic galaxy. If you just even come down to our solar system, and then you come down to Earth, I mean,
hmm
even when I'm in the airplane and I look down, you can't see until you get a little lower that, these things that are going on in our little ants, but when we're here, it seems big. And I
hmm
think when we understand that we are part of something larger, then we can understand the awesomeness. Anytime I think of awesomeness, I think of when we went to the Grand Canyon, and I look and I
mm
see the awesomeness of what had been carved out by, it almost feels like somebody took and carved this thing out. We know it was done over time, but it's just beauty. It takes your breath away. And can
Yeah,
we experience that every day? I think we all can. And that's part of what my messaging is as well, is like we can produce on purpose every single day that we're here. So, Bob, it has been exciting, awesome to talk.
uh,
I'm
lovely.
going to ask you one question here that I
Sure.
love to ask for our audience is, are there two or three things that can someone can implement today that can change their lives?
Three things. You're not your thoughts. You have a responsibility to awe, and have a dog.
Dogs are awesome. We have a grand pup, and every single time I could leave the house for 1 minute, he's going to come back and he's going to act like it's been 10 years. So
Right.
they're in the moment, and that's how we all should
They
be
are.
in the moment, and they will always show
Yeah.
that love. Bob, how can my
I
listeners?
just
Oh, go ahead.
Jack Cornfield, one of my teachers, and well-known meditation teacher, once said something that sounded like the Rudyard Kipling's poem "If." He said, "If you can keep your head about you when the financials are going down, when you can be present, when you can eat anything that's put in front of you," and he goes on and on like that, "you're probably a dog."
Yes, you're in the moment. So, Bob, how can
Okay.
my
hmm
listeners get in touch with you and be able to get more information and connect with you?
Okay. Well, there's my web page, which we just relaunched. I'm very excited about it. Is awiseandhappylife.com. And if you go there, you can contact me directly. But even more important, you can get a 40-page ebook free just by clicking the button. You can get a 40-page ebook that I wrote that's called "What is Meditation and What It's Not, and Is It for Me?"
Okay. Well, Bob, it has been wonderful. Thank you for sharing your great message and wisdom with us, and a little bit about meditation and your story and your journey. It has been awesome. I have taken away quite a bit from our conversation, and I believe that if everyone who is listening can connect with Bob and understand some of the key portions there, and how we can live this life in a more aware way, how we can be at more and more awe in our lives, how we can really become that observer into what's going on in our lives, then we can all start to move into a place where we all can produce on purpose.